He looked me right in the eyes when he said it. "Dad, you're not needed anymore." For a moment, the whole boardroom fell silent. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop humming, as if the walls themselves couldn't believe what they'd heard. I remember my hand tightening around my old fountain pen, the same one I'd used to sign our company's very first contract 40 years ago. Its brass edges were worn smooth, like a memory too often touched. I didn't look at him right away. Instead, I glanced around the table, young faces, sharp suits, expensive watches ticking in quiet agreement. My son's voice echoed again in my mind, colder this time, practiced. "You've done enough, Dad. It's time to let the next generation handle things." Funny thing, I had always dreamed of this day. Of watching him take the reins, guiding him through mistakes, laughing over coffee when he'd call me for advice. But I never imagined this version of it, where he'd cut me loose like a tired employee. I looked down at the papers in front of me. Quarterly reports. Forecasts. Graphs that didn't tell half the story of what it cost to build them. Behind those numbers were nights I slept on factory floors, deals signed in roadside cafes, and a wife who'd carried the weight of my absences without complaint. And now, my own blood, my boy, was calling me obsolete. I wanted to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The board members shifted awkwardly. No one wanted to meet my eyes. No one wanted to choose sides. Except for my son. He leaned forward, fingers steepled like the CEO he thought he was born to be. "Dad, you taught me everything about business. But it's different now. We need speed, data, modern thinking. You built the foundation and we're grateful. But you're holding us back." That word, grateful, burned more than the rest. Gratitude was for charity, not blood. I finally looked up, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a crack in old paint. "You think I'm holding you back, huh?" I said softly. He didn't flinch. He just nodded. "Yeah, I do." I let the silence linger until I could feel his confidence start to twitch. Then I nodded slowly and stood up. "Well then," I said, sliding the fountain pen into my pocket, "I suppose I shouldn't stand in your way." There was a murmur. Someone cleared their throat. My old partner, Ravi, reached out like he wanted to stop me, but I raised a hand. "It's all right," I told him. "Every empire eventually forgets the hands that built it. Maybe that's how it's meant to be." I walked out before they could see the wetness forming in my eyes. In the hallway, my footsteps echoed against marble, cold, perfect, and unfamiliar. I'd chosen that marble myself decades ago. Back then, I thought it would last forever. Outside, the city was buzzing, indifferent. People crossing streets, honking cars, the smell of rain mixing with exhaust. And I realized something. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just an ache. A hollow one, deep in the place where pride and love used to live together. That night, I sat alone in my old study, the one my son had turned into a digital workspace last year. The shelves were bare now, replaced by screens and cables. But behind a framed photo of my wife, hidden in a drawer, was the folder no one knew about. A folder that held the majority of the company's shares. He might have forgotten what I built. But I hadn't forgotten how to build. Or how to end. I opened the folder and looked at the papers. The rival company's CEO, a man named Karen Mehta, had been trying to buy our shares for years. I'd always refused. Until now. I smiled faintly as I dialed his number. "Mr. Mehta," I said, my voice calm but steady, "I believe I'm ready to talk." When Karen answered, he didn't sound surprised, almost as if he'd been waiting for my call. And that was the first time I realized, this game had more players than I thought. Karen's voice came through the phone smooth as silk, too smooth, like a man who always knew where every piece on the board was. "Mr. Azim," he said, "I thought you'd never call." That line caught me off guard. I hadn't even told him why I was calling yet. He laughed softly. "I heard about what happened today. Word travels fast in our circles. I imagine it wasn't easy." I leaned back in my chair. The wood creaked beneath me, the same chair I'd sat in to sign our company's founding documents. "Nothing's easy when it involves your own blood," I replied. "Ah," Karen said, "that's the thing about family. They grow up believing your hands will always be there to catch them. Until they start flying, and forget who taught them the sky." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at the framed photo on the wall, my wife smiling, holding our newborn son. He'd had the same determined eyes even then. I used to think it was strength. Now I wasn't so sure. Finally I said, "Let's not waste time. You've wanted my shares for years. What's your offer?" Karen chuckled again, this time quieter. "Straight to business. I like that. But are you sure this isn't about pride, Mr. Azim? Not revenge?" I paused. Because he was right to ask. Part of me was driven by pride, bruised, trembling pride that couldn't bear being told I was not needed. But another part of me, older, quieter, wanted to teach a lesson that couldn't be found in any business textbook. I exhaled. Let's just say I'm making sure history doesn't forget who built the foundation. Karen hummed thoughtfully. Then you'll want more than just money, I suppose? I want silence, I said. No press. No leaks. This stays between us. My son will keep running the company, for now, and he won't know a thing until I'm ready for him to. Karen's laugh turned into something darker. Ah, I see. You want him to feel safe while the floor beneath him starts to crack. You're a patient man, Mr. Azim. I respect that. I didn't answer that. I wasn't proud of the way it sounded. Because the truth is, I wasn't planning to destroy him. Not completely. Just remind him what it costs to forget the hands that built his world. We discussed numbers, clauses, and timelines for the next hour. Every word was precise, every pause deliberate. Years of boardrooms had taught me how to hide emotion behind negotiation. Finally, Karen said, "We'll draft the papers quietly. My people can have them to you by next week." "Good," I said. "Make sure they understand. I want this invisible until I say otherwise." He hesitated for just a second. "You have my word," he said. "But I'll tell you something, old friend. When you sell a kingdom, it's not the money that changes hands. It's power. And once it moves, it never returns to the same place." After we hung up, I sat there in the dim light of my study. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the city lights shimmered like distant memories. I should have felt relief. Instead, all I felt was the quiet heaviness of consequence. I reached for my pen again, that same brass pen now trembling between my fingers, and I signed my name on the preliminary letter of intent. It was strange. After all these years of building, one signature could unbuild everything. As I sealed the envelope, I thought about something my father once told me when I was young. "Son, one day you'll build something bigger than yourself. And the day you think you own it, that's the day it starts owning you." I didn't understand him then. But tonight I did. I looked toward the window, watching lightning stretch across the sky. Somewhere out there, my son was probably celebrating another modern milestone, surrounded by his board, unaware of the quiet storm that had just begun. And as thunder rolled, I whispered to the empty room, "You'll learn, my boy. Just not the way you think." But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have guessed, was that Karen Mehta wasn't just waiting for my call. He had been working for me all along. I didn't sleep that night. The rain kept whispering against the windows, soft but relentless, the kind that sounds like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear. Every drop was a question, every thunderclap an answer I didn't want. By morning, I was sitting on the porch with my old cup of tea, staring at the sunrise the way I used to when my wife was alive. She used to say dawn was God's way of giving us another chance to make things right. I wasn't sure if what I was about to do qualified as right. The papers arrived 2 days later, crisp, official, perfect. But there was something strange about them. At the bottom of the letterhead in fine print was the name of a firm I recognized, M&S Holdings. It wasn't Karen's company. It was mine. A silent subsidiary I'd created decades ago when the company was expanding overseas. It was still legally in my name, hidden under layers of shell entities. I frowned, flipping through the documents. Why would Karen's lawyers use my holding company's resources? Before I could overthink it, my phone buzzed. It was Karen. "Morning, Mr. Azim," he said. "I trust the documents are satisfactory?" "They are," I said slowly. "But tell me something, why is M&S Holdings involved in this?" There was a brief pause. Then he said quietly, "Because that's where I work." I froze. "What are you talking about? You're the CEO of Apex Industrial." He laughed, low and steady. "Apex was never my company, sir. You made me its face. Don't you remember?" I closed my eyes as the memory came rushing back. 15 years ago, a young analyst had come to me with a fire in his eyes and hunger in his heart. His name was Karen Mehta. I had seen myself in him, ambitious, clever, dangerously determined. When we expanded into competitor markets, I needed someone to build Apex quietly, a shadow rival to keep my own board on their toes. And I had chosen Karen. He had grown that company from the ground up just as I had trained him to. And somewhere along the line, we'd let the world believe Apex and ours were enemies. But they were never enemies. They were mirrors. Now it made sense. I exhaled slowly. "So this buyout isn't a buyout," Karen finished. "It's a return. You're not selling your shares, sir. You're consolidating them. Apex and your company will become one entity again, under your control." For the first time in weeks I felt my lips curve into a real smile. "You clever devil," I said. "I learned from the best," he replied softly. Then his tone changed, lower, careful. "But if I may, sir, what's your end game? You've already won. Why not just take back the chairmanship?" "Because," I said, gazing at the company tower in the distance, "if I step back in, he'll never learn. He'll think he can bruise loyalty and get away with it. No. Let him run it. Let him feel powerful, until the day he realizes the strings he's pulling lead right back to my hand." There was a pause. Then Karen said something I'll never forget. "Then you're not just teaching him business, sir. You're teaching him humility." Humility. It was such a small word for such a painful lesson. I nodded silently and hung up. That afternoon I signed the documents. Every page felt heavier than the last, but I signed them anyway, with that same fountain pen that had seen my rise, my fall, and now, perhaps, my quiet resurrection. When I finished, I looked at the clock. 5:47 p.m. It was around this time years ago that I'd first taken my son to the factory floor. He'd been 10. His eyes had lit up at the sight of the machines, the workers, the smell of metal and oil. He'd said, "One day I'll make this even bigger, Dad." And I had believed him. I still wanted to. But sometimes love needs distance to be understood. As I sealed the envelope and placed it in the courier's hand, I whispered, "Let's see how much my boy can handle before the storm hits." The man nodded and left. Outside, the sky had turned red, like an ember that refused to die. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope marked the beginning of my son's greatest test, and my final lesson to him. A week later, my son called me for the first time since that meeting. His voice was trembling. "Dad," he said, "something's happening in the company, and I don't understand it." The phone rang just as the evening call to prayer faded outside my window. It had been a quiet week, too quiet. I'd spent my mornings walking through the garden, pruning the same roses my wife used to care for. Funny thing about roses, the moment you stop tending them, they turn wild no matter how beautiful they once were. Companies, sons, they're not so different. When I saw my son's name flash across the phone, I didn't answer right away. I just watched it ring, the name I'd given him now blinking at me like an old memory I wasn't ready to face. Finally I picked up. "Dad." His voice cracked slightly, caught between arrogance and something that sounded almost uncertain. "Yes," I said, calm as ever. "How's the new era of modern thinking going?" He let out a dry laugh. "Don't start, please. I'm dealing with something." "Oh." I leaned back in my chair. "And what's that?" He hesitated, the silence stretching long enough for me to hear his breath quicken. "Something's wrong with the numbers. Our accounts, the holding structures, they're shifting. Legal's confused. Our board's panicking. Some shares are being moved into new entities without any explanation. I thought maybe you'd—" He stopped himself, but I heard the word before he swallowed it. "No." I smiled faintly. "So the data-driven future has bugs, does it?" "Dad, please," he said, frustrated. "This isn't a joke. Investors are calling. The media's sniffing around. Someone's trying to take control." "Control?" I repeated softly. "That's an interesting word. Tell me, son, what makes you think you ever had it?" He went quiet. I could almost hear the confusion grinding behind his silence. After a while he said, "Look, whatever's happening, if you know something, help me. Please. I can't lose this." And for the briefest second my heart almost broke. Because that voice, that plea, wasn't the voice of a CEO or a strategist. It was my little boy again, calling from the schoolyard after a bad day, asking if I could come pick him up early. But I stayed silent. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting someone fall. Finally I said, "You'll figure it out. You're modern, remember? The future's yours." Then I hung up. The next morning the headlines hit. Apex Industrial merges with Azim Holdings. Control shifts quietly in overnight deal. New structural entity emerges. M&S Group, ownership undisclosed. I watched the news anchors speculate, analysts debate, and shareholders scramble. And my son. He stood before the cameras that afternoon, jaw clenched, trying to steady a ship he didn't realize had already set sail without him. His speech was good, polished, measured, professional. But I could see it in his eyes. He was drowning behind that suit. Later that night, Ravi, my old partner, came by. He stood in my study doorway watching me sip tea like we used to after long factory nights. "So," he said softly, "you did it." I didn't look up. "I did what had to be done." He sighed. "And when will you tell him?" "When he's ready to listen," I said. "Or when it's too late?" Ravi asked gently. That question lingered long after he left. Because the truth was, I didn't know the answer. I thought back to the boardroom that day, to my son's voice echoing, "You're not needed anymore." And for a moment, I wondered if maybe I wasn't just teaching him a lesson. Maybe I was trying to prove something to myself, that I still mattered. The following week he called again, twice, then 3 times. I didn't pick up. But on the 4th call, I heard something in his tone that stopped me. He wasn't angry anymore. He was scared. "Dad," he said quietly, "I think someone's been inside our systems for years. There are structures, shell companies, things even our lawyers can't trace. It's like whoever did this built it from the very beginning." I almost smiled. Maybe they did. He was silent for a long moment. Then, in a whisper that sounded more like realization than confusion, he said, "Dad, did you plan all this?" I didn't answer. I simply let the quiet fill the space until he sighed and hung up. That night, as I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker like dying candles, I whispered to the wind, "No, my son. I didn't plan this for you. I built it for us. You just forgot that." The next morning there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I didn't see my son. I saw his assistant, holding a legal notice in one hand and fear in his eyes. It was early, too early for visitors. The kind of hour when the sky still carries that blue-gray sadness before sunrise. I just poured my tea when the knock came. 3 soft taps. Hesitant. Not the kind of knock that demands entry. The kind that fears what's waiting inside. When I opened the door, a young man stood there, mid-20s, sharp suit, trembling hands. I recognized him immediately. My son's assistant. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was crooked, his eyes red, and he held an envelope like it was something radioactive. "Sir," he said quietly, I was asked to deliver this to you. I didn't take it right away. Instead, I looked at him for a long moment. "Did he send you?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Mr. Azim wanted me to hand it to you personally." That name, Mr. Azim, it used to be mine. Hearing it given to my son felt like watching my reflection walk away and forget to wave goodbye. I took the envelope and tore it open. The paper inside was thick, official, and reeked of panic. Legal notice. Cease and desist all interference with Azim Industries operations, holdings, and subsidiaries. Immediate termination of involvement effective upon receipt. My eyes skimmed the rest, but I didn't need to. I'd seen this play before, just not from this side of the table. I looked up at Arif. Did he write this himself? He hesitated, glancing down. "He dictated it to legal last night, sir. He's not in a good state." I can imagine. He didn't sleep. He's been yelling, pacing the boardroom. Some of the senior members are threatening to resign. There's talk of a merger audit, rumors in the market. He thinks you're behind all of it. I smiled faintly. He's a smart boy. Arif shifted nervously. "Sir, if I may," he stopped, then took a breath. "He's not just angry. He's scared." He said, "If my father wanted to destroy me, he's doing a good job." That line hit deeper than I wanted it to. Because I hadn't set out to destroy him. But power doesn't teach gently. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the side table. "Tell him," I said softly, "that I received his message." Arif nodded but didn't move. He lingered as if torn between duty and decency. Then he whispered, "Sir, he doesn't hate you. He's just lost." I looked past him at the rising sun, spilling gold across the garden. "Sometimes," I said, "we all need to lose ourselves before we can find where we truly belong." When he left, the house grew heavy again, that kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. I poured another cup of tea and stared at the notice. The words blurred slightly, not from age but from something else building in my eyes. After a long time, I picked up my phone and called Karen. He answered instantly. "Sir." "He's pushing back," I said. "I expected that," Karen replied calmly. "He's cornered. The board's panicking and Apex's shadow is making it worse. Shall I proceed to the next step?" I hesitated. "What's the next step?" "Exposure," he said. "We can show the board who truly owns what. Once they see the structure, they'll have no choice but to accept your authority again. Your son will be out." I fell silent. For weeks that had been the plan, the cold, logical route. But something inside me wavered. "No," I said finally. "Not yet. Sir, with respect." "Not yet, Karen," I repeated. "He's still my son. Let him fight. Let him burn some pride before I take away the fire." Karen sighed. "You're giving him time to destroy himself." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. Maybe that's the only way he'll understand what it feels like to build from ashes. When the call ended, I sat there for a long while, staring at the letter on my table. The paper trembled slightly in the breeze from the window, the same way my hands used to tremble the first time I held him as a baby. I thought of all the years I'd spent teaching him to stand tall, to speak firmly, to never bend to pressure. Maybe I had done too good a job. Later that day, I drove to the old factory, the original one, the one we'd built from nothing. Dusty, abandoned now. The scent of oil and rust still lingered like ghosts of effort. I ran my fingers along the cracked wall, whispering, "You remember us, don't you?" The wind answered through the broken windows, a soft, hollow sound, like laughter fading in an empty hall. I didn't know it then, but this was the calm before the storm. Because the next time I saw my son, he wouldn't be holding a letter. He'd be holding anger, and questions I wasn't ready to answer. 2 nights later, he came to my house, unannounced, uninvited, and burning with fury. And when he spoke, his first words weren't of business. They were of betrayal. I heard the tires before I saw the car. The night was still, the street lamps humming faintly, when a black sedan tore into my driveway like a bullet that had lost its target. The headlights cut across the garden, blinding for a moment, then the door slammed. And there he was, my son. His tie hung loose, his hair disheveled, his face red with the kind of anger that comes when pride starts to rot. He didn't knock. He just walked in like he used to when he was little, only this time he carried no laughter. "Dad," he snapped, "we need to talk." I didn't rise from my chair. I simply gestured toward the seat across from me. "Then sit." He didn't. Instead, he stood there, trembling, his jaw tight. "I know it's you. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes. The merger, the share movements, the legal silence, all of it. You've been setting me up." I looked at him quietly. "Setting you up? No, son. You did that yourself the day you mistook inheritance for ownership." His eyes flared. "Don't talk in riddles. Do you have any idea what's happening out there? Investors are calling me a fool. The board's losing faith. You're destroying everything I've built." I finally stood, slowly, calmly. "Everything you've built?" I asked. He blinked. The question hit him like a slap. I stepped closer, voice low but sharp. "Tell me, son, when you walk into that marble lobby every morning, whose hands do you think laid the first brick? When you signed those contracts in your air-conditioned office, whose sweat do you think paid for the ink? When you speak to the press about vision and innovation, do you even remember whose dream you're standing on?" He took a step back, eyes wet now, but his pride still held firm. "You don't understand, Dad. Times have changed. We need new methods, new ideas. The world doesn't run on loyalty and stories anymore." I nodded slowly. "You're right. The world has changed. But integrity hasn't. Respect hasn't. Gratitude hasn't." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick, heavier than it had ever been. Finally, he said, softer this time, "I never wanted it to be like this." "Neither did I whispered. "But you drew the line. I just showed you what's on the other side." He turned away, pacing. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "What do you want from me? Do you want me to beg? To apologize on television? What is it you're trying to prove?" I shook my head. "I don't want anything. I already have what I built, and I've kept it alive longer than you realized." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I walked over to my old study desk and pulled open the drawer, the same one that had once hidden my original share documents. I placed a thin folder on the table. "Open it." He hesitated, then did. Inside were copies of the merger documents, not the fake narrative he'd been told, but the real structure. The one that showed my holdings through M&S, the hidden firm that connected everything. As he scanned the pages, his hands began to shake. This can't be right." "It's always been right," I said. "You just never looked deep enough." He looked up, eyes wide. "So you own everything?" "No," I said. "I built everything. There's a difference." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, voice trembling, "Why, Dad? Why not just tell me? Why go through all this? The secrecy, the power games? Why humiliate me like this?" I took a slow breath. "Because you wouldn't have listened otherwise." His mouth opened, then closed. His anger faltered, replaced by something rawer, hurt. "I just wanted to prove I could do it," he said quietly. "Without you. And I wanted to see if you could do it with the values I taught you," I said. Turns out both of us were wrong. We stood there in silence, 2 men bound by blood but divided by ego. Finally he looked down, voice breaking. "So what now? Do I step down? Do you take it all back?" I shook my head. "No. You'll keep running it. But you'll know from now on what you're standing on, and who made it possible. Not to shame you, but to remind you. He looked at me with something between anger and shame. Then he said, "You're cruel." "Maybe," I said softly. "But sometimes the cruelest lessons save the most stubborn hearts." He left without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the empty hall like thunder in an old valley. I stood there alone, staring at the folder on the table, the truth now exposed. And for the first time since that boardroom, my hands trembled. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt old. But the next day, something happened that neither of us expected. My son called an emergency press conference. And what he said there changed everything. The next morning, I woke to a dozen missed calls. News alerts flashed across my phone screen, headlines screaming in all caps. Azim Industries CEO calls emergency press briefing amid merger rumors. Son of founder to address family conflict, live at 10 a.m. Family conflict. They made it sound like a scandal. Maybe it was. I turned on the television just as the camera cut to him, standing behind a podium, the company's logo glowing faintly behind him. He looked pale, tired, but strangely calm. That calm scared me more than his anger ever had. Reporters' voices overlapped in chaos. "Mr. Azim, are you resigning? Is it true your father has taken control again? Who owns M&S Holdings?" He raised a hand and the room fell quiet. That single gesture, the same one I'd used for years, silenced the storm. He took a breath and began. "Before I speak as a CEO, I need to speak as a son." My chest tightened. "I grew up watching my father build this company from nothing," he continued, voice steady but heavy. "He sacrificed everything, comfort, time, even his health, to give this nation something lasting. But somewhere along the way I started believing the company was mine. That I could run it better, faster, smarter." He paused, eyes flickering down for a second. "And in that arrogance, I forgot who taught me everything I know." The reporters shifted uncomfortably, cameras clicking in bursts. But he didn't stop. "My father may no longer sit in the chairman's chair. But make no mistake, every wall in this building, every line of code in our systems, every heartbeat in this company, carries his fingerprints. I owe him more than success. I owe him existence." The room went silent. No one expected humility. Not from him. Not now. Then, with a trembling smile, he said, "As of today, I've reinstated my father as honorary chairman and lifelong consultant of Azim Industries. He might call himself outdated, but I call him the foundation." My teacup slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. The reporters burst into applause, the kind of applause that doesn't sound rehearsed. But all I could hear was my heartbeat, slow, uneven, heavy. For the next few minutes he spoke about renewal, about values, about bridging generations. His words carried both guilt and grace. And when it ended, the cameras followed him as he stepped away from the podium, shoulders lighter, eyes tired but alive. I didn't move for a long time. The house was quiet again, except for the hum of the television and the fragments of a teacup at my feet. When the phone rang, I knew who it was before I saw the name. "Dad," he said softly, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to come home. To the company. To where you belong." For a moment I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat was too heavy, made of years of pride, pain, and love unspoken. Finally I managed, "You're sure about this?" "I am," he said. "Maybe it's time we build again, together?" I smiled faintly, staring at the sunlight spilling through the window. It had been so long since I'd seen it that warm. "All right," I said quietly. "But understand something, son. I'm not coming back to take charge." "Then why will you come?" "To remind you," I said, "that roots don't compete with branches. They just hold them up." There was silence on the other end. Then softly he said, "I'll see you tomorrow, Dad." When I hung up, I felt something shift in me, something that had been rusted shut for years. Not victory. Not revenge. I bent down, picked up a shard of the broken teacup and smiled. Maybe some things have to break before they can be worth holding again. But the next day when I returned to the office after all those years, I realized forgiveness wasn't going to be that simple, because waiting in the boardroom was someone I hadn't seen since my wife's funeral. I hadn't been back in that building for nearly 2 years. The elevator ride felt like a lifetime compressed between steel and silence. The same polished floor, the same faint scent of cedar polish, the same framed photographs, but they all looked different now, like echoes of a dream I'd already woken from. As the doors opened on the top floor, a wave of memories hit me. That boardroom, the same one where my son had humiliated me, stood waiting like a ghost I was finally ready to face. The receptionist smiled nervously, unsure how to greet me. "Good morning, Mr. Azim," she whispered. "Good morning, child," I said kindly. "Still keeping everyone in line?" Her laugh was small, but it warmed the air. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors. Inside, my son stood at the far end of the table. But he wasn't alone. There was a man sitting beside him, mid-40s, clean suit, calm face, eyes too sharp for comfort. I recognized him instantly. Rafiq, the so-called rival CEO. The same man to whom I'd sold my majority shares. For a second the air left the room. I'd told no one about the arrangement, not even my son. And yet here they were. Together. My son turned, smiling faintly. "Dad," he said, "I think you already know Rafiq." I nodded slowly. "Yes, we've met." Rafiq rose to his feet, that same polite composure masking the cunning I'd admired. "Good to see you again, sir," he said. "Or should I say boss?" My son looked between us, confused. "Boss?" I looked at Rafiq, then back at my son. "You didn't tell him?" Rafiq chuckled softly. "You asked me not to. I kept my word." My son's eyes darted between us, the color draining from his face. "Wait, what are you talking about?" I gestured toward the chairs. "Sit down, son. It's time you learned the whole story." He sat, eyes locked on me. "When I sold the company, I began, it wasn't to destroy you. It was to protect what I built, from you and from the people whispering in your ear. The moment I realized you were being manipulated, I knew I had to act quietly. Rafiq here, he wasn't my rival. He was my shield." Rafiq leaned back, folding his hands. "Your father hired me years ago, long before your takeover. My company was never competition. It was a mirror. A way to test your leadership, your loyalty, and your humility." My son's jaw dropped. "You mean, the entire merger was never real?" I said. "Just a reflection of how you'd react when you thought power was yours alone." He sank back in his chair, face pale, voice small. "You played me." I sighed. "No, son. I taught you. The same way life once taught me, with pain." The room was heavy with silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum quieter. Rafiq stood, smoothing his jacket. "You've got a good company, Azim. You just forgot what makes it good, people like your father." My son looked up at him, shame flooding his eyes. Then he turned to me. "You trusted him more than me?" I shook my head. "No. I trusted that one day, you'd become wise enough to understand why I had to." He looked down, blinking hard, his voice trembling. "All these months, I hated you for leaving. I thought you abandoned everything we built." "I did leave," I said softly. "But only to give you the space to see what it takes to hold something together." He didn't answer. His lips pressed tight, his shoulders rigid. But I could see it, the wall inside him cracking one brick at a time. Rafiq walked to the door. "I'll leave you too," he said. "My work here is done." As he left, my son whispered almost to himself, "He was working for you all along." I smiled faintly. Everyone was, son. Even the silence. Even the distance. He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "You and your tests. You always have a lesson hidden behind everything, don't you?" "Because life hides its lessons the same way," I said. He stared at me for a long time. Then his voice broke. "I'm sorry, Dad." I didn't speak, I just nodded. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words. It just needs a pause long enough for the truth to breathe. We sat there together, not as founder and successor, not as teacher and student, but simply as father and son, the way it should have been all along. Outside, the city hummed. The sun reflected on the glass tower across the street, the same one where our company logo once hung proudly. And for the first time I saw the reflection shimmer, not with loss but with light. But peace, as I've learned, is never permanent, because that very night, I received a letter that revealed one final truth. A truth even I wasn't prepared for. That night I couldn't sleep. The city outside my window glittered like it always had, loud, alive, indifferent. But inside me there was only stillness. The kind that feels like both peace and emptiness. I sat by the lamp, reading old notes I'd once scribbled, business strategies, expansion plans, lists of goals long fulfilled. But none of them said what I really wanted to hear. That my son finally understood me. Around midnight the doorbell rang. A guard stood there holding an envelope. "From the office, sir," he said. "Your son asked me to deliver this tonight." The envelope was plain, no seal, no markings. Just my name, written in his handwriting. I closed the door, sat down and stared at it for a long moment. It felt heavier than it looked. When I finally opened it, a small key slipped out, and a folded letter followed. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but unmistakably his. I began to read. Dad, I don't know if I'll ever be able to say these things to your face without breaking down, so I'm writing instead. When I said, "You're not needed anymore," that day in the boardroom, I didn't mean it. I was angry. I was tired of feeling like a shadow under your name. Everyone kept saying, "You'll never be like your father." And I wanted just once to prove them wrong. But in trying to escape your shadow, I forgot you weren't casting it to block me, you were casting it to shield me. I spent months blaming you for my failures, until Rafik told me something that stopped me cold. He said, "Your father never wanted control. He wanted legacy." And it hit me, I'd spent my whole life chasing what you built, when all you ever wanted was for me to protect it. The key in this envelope, it's for your old cabin by the lake. I've restored it, every plank, every window, every photo. Just like Mom left it. I know you always said that's where you felt closest to her. I thought maybe it's time you went back, not to work, not to teach, not to fight, but to rest. You've carried all of us for so long, Dad. Maybe it's time we carried you. Love, your son. By the time I finished reading, my eyes were wet. I turned the key over in my hand. It was old, same brass tone, same scratches, but newly polished. He'd remembered. The next morning I drove to the lake. The cabin stood there exactly as it had decades ago. The wooden porch, the faded blue shutters, the same wind chimes my wife once hung. I stepped inside, and there, on the mantelpiece, was a single photograph, the three of us. Me, my wife, and a boy with eyes too bright for the world. Underneath it, a note in my son's handwriting again. "We're still growing, Dad. Because roots never stop." I sat in that cabin for hours, listening to the wind through the trees. For the first time, I didn't think about numbers or meetings or stock values. I just breathed. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you said once and moved on from. Maybe it was something you lived, every day, until it no longer hurt to remember. And as the sun dipped behind the water, I whispered to the air, "I forgive you, son." Then softer, "And thank you." But before I left that cabin, I found one last thing tucked behind that photograph, something my late wife had written years ago. And it was the message that finally tied everything together. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that photograph. The sun had almost set, streaks of orange and violet spilling across the lake, the light trembling like it was trying to hold on for just a few more moments before disappearing. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I stood. Something behind the frame caught my eye, a small piece of folded paper, yellowed with time, tucked just behind the photograph's back panel. My heart stumbled in my chest. I knew that handwriting. Even after all these years, I'd know it anywhere. It was her. My wife. Hands trembling, I pulled the note free and unfolded it. The ink had faded, but her words were still as steady as the day she'd written them. "My love, if you're reading this, it means the house is quiet again. And if the house is quiet, it means you've worked too hard and spoken too little. You always believed that strength meant never bending. But love, my dear, is what teaches us to bend without breaking. One day our son will grow into his own storm. He'll say things that hurt you. He'll do things that shake the walls you built. But don't meet his fire with fire. Meet it with patience. Meet it with faith. Meet it with the same love that once made you build a future for him. Remember, you are not just giving him a company, you are giving him a name, a story, a legacy of kindness. That is worth more than any fortune. And when he forgets, because he will, let time remind him. It will hurt, I know. But trust me, love always finds its way back home. Yours always, Amna. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I sat down on the porch, letter in hand, the soft night wrapping itself around me. The lake shimmered quietly as if it too was listening. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation. The silence. The long road of pride and forgiveness. And in that moment I realized she had seen it all before it ever happened. She'd known both of us too well. I folded the letter gently, placed it back behind the photo, and smiled through the ache in my chest. The wind stirred the chimes outside, her favorite sound, and I laughed softly. "All right, Amna," I whispered. "You win again." The next morning my son arrived at the cabin. He didn't speak at first, he just hugged me. Not the formal kind of hug between adults who pretend not to feel, but the real kind, the one that pulls years of distance into a single heartbeat. When we finally sat by the lake, he asked, "Dad, what now?" I smiled at the water. "Now? Now we stop building walls and start planting roots." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. And together we sat in silence, two men finally learning how to be family again. As the sun rose, I thought of the company, of the world waiting beyond that quiet shore. But for the first time in decades, I didn't feel the pull to go back. Because sometimes the greatest success isn't in what you build, but in what you learn to let go of. Never replace the roots that fed you. For one day you'll realize, the fruit only grows because something older, quieter, and wiser stayed beneath the soil, unseen but steadfast. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who's forgotten where they came from. Remind them, every dream begins with someone who once believed in them first.